Welcome to part one of the pink rose and sherbet glass on pastel mat. I'm using a piece of light green pastel mat and a majority of pastel pencils and some soft pastels that I'll explain as we go through this. Here I have a Rembrandt 318.9 carmine, and I'm adding a layer on this first petal. I'm just loosely putting it in with the carmine. This is going to serve as our base coat that we'll be able to manipulate the color with the pastel pencil as we go along. You have to fill up the tooth a little bit in order to get the pastels to blend together and look beautiful for your painting. Now after I've filled in the petal with a light layer of color, I'm going to take it's a little sponge applicator made by Soft Tools to blend the soft pastel into the pastel mat. Now other applicators will only take the pastel off. I haven't found anything that works better than Soft Tools, but they work very well for blending this soft pastel on the pastel mat. A stump is just going to take the color off, so don't use that. So this is our first layer. I fill in a little more color as needed. If I think it needs to have a little more pastel on the paper, I just use my Rembrandt and add some more to it, and then blend it with the applicator. I did use a small stump here to push the color further into the paper after I used the Soft Tool applicator on it. You can do this or you could not do it. It'd be your choice, but I thought I'd include it so you would know everything that I do when I paint. Here I'm using a Conte pencil number 38, which is madder pink, to start changing the color to make it darker, to start adding some contouring to the petal and additional color. Now the reason I chose this pencil was because of the color. Pastel pencils come in a variety of colors, and so I'm going to be using a variety of brands of color pencils for this project. The Conte pencils are a little softer than other brands and add a little more vibrancy. So this color was perfect for my rose petal. So I'm using it, laying down color, and then blending it with the Soft Tool applicator. Here I'm using Conte pencil number 11, which is pink, and it's cooler to tone the bottom half of the petal. So as the petal rolls down towards the table, I'm going to make the color a little cooler because it's turned away from the light. So we're going to use the Conte pink pastel pencil to do that, and then blend it with the sponge applicator. I'm using the number 38 Conte pencil to add a little more color to the surface of the petal. This is a Carbothello 100 white. I'm using it over the pastel pencil to lighten that specific edge, and it works beautifully for that. That is one of the great aspects about using pastel matte and about using pastel pencils. Carbothello is a great brand, so I'm using it just to lighten specific areas of the petal. Here I'm adding a little more pastel, soft pastel, and just rubbing it in with my finger. We have a nice surface now. Now I'm going to add some more color. This is a little darker than the Conte pencil. This is Derwent 190, P190, and it's called Coral. So I'm using that to darken the color. This is a Carbothello 310 Carmine Red. This is making the petal warmer at the top, and I just blend it in with my finger. Really like this color. Now down here, as the petal is starting to turn, I'm using a different Carbothello pencil, which is 335 Magenta. So you can see it's cooler. This whole side of the petal, as it faces away from the light, is cooler. So we can manipulate that color with our pastel pencils. Petal needs to go a little bit darker as it turns into shadow, so I'm using a Carbothello 385 Violet Deep to add over the pink. This is a more purpley, blue-purple color to darken that petal further. You can see me holding all my pencils in my hand, so I can switch back and forth. So I'm going back to the magenta which is a more of a red tone to go over the purple. And I can keep doing this until I get just the right color that I want, and just gently smooth it with my finger. Now where I need it to be darker, I'm using the Carbothello 750 Black to go over the purples that we've added to just darken the color even a little bit more. Going back and forth between the 335 and the 385. This is 335 magenta. And now that the tooth is pretty much filled up, or there's a good base coat, we can just gently add color and blend it with our finger. This is 330 Carbothello, which is a dark, almost alizarin crimson red, that I'm darkening that area a little further with. I'm continuing to add color. I feel like it needs a little more 335, so I can add some more of that. And some more 385. Just carefully blending it with my finger. And this is the 310 red. I've finished off this petal with a little bit of 100 Carbothello white at the top, at the back, and for the little flip up where the petal turns up. Now we're going to add some of the turned up areas of this petal, and we're going to use a lighter color, Permanent Rose 39710 Rembrandt. I'm adding that to this upper edge of the petal that's going to be flipped up towards the light. And we're going to do it the same way we did the other. We're going to put it in and then blend it with our soft tool. Now after I've blended it, I'm going to use my Carbothello 100 pastel pencil to go over this area and make it a little brighter and whiter. So I'm manipulating the color of the soft pastel with the pencils. And each layer that I add with pencils or with soft pastel makes the surface a little smoother and gives us a really beautiful finish. So I'm filling this in with my pencil. And joining it down to the bottom edge where it's flipped up. Here I'm going to use a little bit of Derwent White. Derwent White is softer than the Carbothello White, so I decided to use it because it is softer. It's not necessary, but if you have one, see how this works to help fill in your petal. I'm using the Carbothello 100 to even out that little flip and join it to the petal on the top. Now this is a great color. I haven't found another color that's like this. This is Conte number 26, and it's called Red Violet, and it's cool. It's a lovely accent in lots of places on the petal. I think you'll enjoy using that. Now this is a little bit of an eraser. I buy these tri-tip erasers. You can get them anywhere. And I cut them into pieces, and I can take that little sliver and get some pastel off that I didn't want there. Now I'm using the Derwent Coral P190 to shade that petal as it begins to turn under. And now I'm using the Conte number 26, the Red Violet, to add a little definition to that petal as it begins to turn down. We're going to use it as shading in that area. And here I'm just keep using the P190 and the Conte pencil to shade this area of the petal. It just gives such depth and dimension. This is my Carbothello 100 again, the white. So I'm making this area a little brighter, and I added the color to the lower part of the petal where it's starting to go into the shadow. Here I'm using Carbothello 100 white on this little flipped up edge of petal. I'm just kind of coloring it in. It's awful small area, so it would be kind of small to get the soft pastel in there, so I just decided to use a pencil for the most part. Add a little bit of soft pastel on the edge. And that's the 397.1 permanent rose. Using the Conte number 38 to add some more madder pink color around that edge. Just keep adjusting your colors and your values until it gets the way you would like it. Now I'm going to shadow that area with the Conte number 26. Just delicately using that. Works beautifully. Now we're going to work on another petal. So I'm using 397.1 permanent rose to add the base coat color of this petal at the top that's flipped up. Blended that with my little applicator, my soft tool applicator. And now I'm going to use the Carbothello 100 weight to smooth that out, make it a little brighter in areas. Kind of going around the outside edge there to make it a little more definitive. The sunlight's coming through this petal and I want to make it a little brighter. So I'm using a Carbothello 692, which is golden ochre light. This is a great color. It is a yellowish color, but it adds that effect of sunlight. Now I can lighten it even more by adding a teeny bit of white with the Carbothello 100 over that. Now we're going to add a shadow just under the top rim and above the light with the Conte 26 red violet. So I'm just putting in short little strokes and then I'm going to blend that with my finger. And that helps this petal turn, which was what we want. We want to give the illusion that it's turning. I'm going to add a little more pink to bridge the color, soften the red violet. And this is the P190 Coral, which is the Derwent. Looks really, really nice, and a little more weight. Now we're moving down to the next petal, and I'm base coating it with 397.1, which is permanent rose Rembrandt, using the edge of it and applying that base coat. Now after I've put the base coat down on this petal, I've added a little bit of Carmine 318.8 to add a little more color to the tip of that petal and also to the back tip of the petal. Now I'm using my Madder Conte number 38 to add more color to this petal, and smoothing it with my finger because we've built up enough pastel now. I don't need the applicator. I can just use my finger to blend it in. I'm using a 645 Carbothello Caput Mortem Red to add just a tinge of brown to the upper petals. Sometimes rose petals, when they're starting to turn and lose their, when they're getting older, they get a little brown edge. So I'm going to use that 645 to do that. It's a good color for that. Now I'm using my 100 white to blend that petal and add a brighter color over top of the pinks. Sometimes you need something just a little brighter. So I'm using a Rembrandt 100.5 white to add white to this petal. It's more highly pigmented than my pencil. I'm just doing it down around that bottom edge. Finishing up with the 100 Carbothello white. And this is the 692 Golden Ochre Light that I'm adding the light pale yellow color to make it glow. I just love how that makes that glow. And a little more of the 645 Caput Mortem red on those edges. And this back edge, I'm going to use the 38 Madder to add a little more pink there. So it's a constant adjustment of edges, colors. So easy to do with pencils. I'm using my little bitty eraser sliver to clean up those edges. Now I have my Rembrandt Carmine 318.9 that I am putting over this next petal in the rose. We are doing the petals singly, which is the easiest way to do it. Because there are so many of them, I wouldn't paint the whole flower pink and then try to delineate these petals. Here I'm adding the lighter color, which is the Permanent Rose 397.1 Rembrandt. I'm putting that color down on the paper, and then we'll blend it with our blender. So I've carefully blended my petal, and now I'm going to add some additional color using the 38 Conte pencil on that top edge and modifying the color of the pink we laid down and putting this beautiful brighter pink over top of that. So we've created the base with the softer pastels. You could do the whole flower with pencils, but I really like using the soft pastels. I'm using the 100 white Carbothello to add white to the pastel, lighten up the color, blending that carefully with my finger, and then adding a glow on the bottom of the petal where the sunlight comes through with the 692 golden ochre light. You notice when I put the color over it, it kind of changes it to an orangey tone. I really like the way that looks. I can add some more white with the Carbothello 100, evening up the outside edge of that petal. A touch of coral with the Derwent P190. I'm continuing to add white with the Carbothello 100 to the outside left side of the petal and blending it with my finger. Moving further down on the flower, moving to the inside, and I'm using the 38 Madder Pink to color this next area. I'm not using a Rembrandt to get in there. I'm just using the matter pink to put in this little area. And then I'm going to modify it with the Derwent 190. Make it a little lighter on the forward edge. Smooth it with my finger. And use the Carbothello 100 white to go over that and lighten it just a little bit. Just play back and forth with the pencils till you get it the color that you want it to be. So going back to the number 38, I'm going to smooth out those colors and blend it with my finger. Now we need something a little redder. So I'm using the Carbothello 310 Carmine Red to deepen those areas in the shadows. It adds a nice bright spot of color to our painting, and a little white brighten up that edge. I'm using my 38 madder to put in the next little petal and color that in. And then I'm going to modify that with the Derwent P190 Coral. Just get that outer edge. That looks really pretty. Now I'm using the Carbothello 310 to add some red to that edge. It's a nice bright red. And the Carbothello 330, which is called purple, but it's kind of an alizarin crimson color, to add the shadow on that particular petal. So that kind of delineates the colors there. And using a little bit of 100 white just to lighten the edge. I'm finishing off this bottom petal with the madder pink. Putting a little bit of red on that with the 310 Carmine Red, brightening it up. And using the Carbothello 330 to add some shadow to that little petal. Here I'm adding a little 305 Carbothello, which is a little brighter red, more towards the orange side, to brighten up these areas, which is very pretty. The 310 and 305 are very close in color, but the 305 has a little more orangey tone. So I can use that to add color. Here I'm putting it over the cooler side of this petal, but it helps brighten it up. Sometimes things get a little dull and need to brighten them up. Now we're moving down to our next set of petals, and I'm base coating with the Permanent Rose, which is 397.1. Then I will blend it in. Seven 0.1 to several petals as a base coat, and I'm using my applicator to blend in and smooth out that color. I'm using my Carbothello 100 white to just smooth out the edges of the petal and to brighten them up a bit. I'm using my Derwent Coral P190 to put a little color right on the edge of these petals as they turn. It helps create the illusion of turning by varying the value a little bit in that area. Adding a touch of the 305 Carbocello, and then using the white 100 Carbocello to continue to smooth out that color. The area with my little sliver of tri-tip eraser, and I'm going to use my Rembrandt 100 white to brighten up this upper petal. Just the pencil didn't quite do what I wanted, didn't add enough vibrancy there, so I'm going to use the softer 100 Rembrandt white, which looks very nice. Smooth the petal out with my blending tool, and now I'm using the Derwent 190 on that edge of that petal. I want to add some cooler color there as it turns, so I'm using the Conte 26 Red Violet, which is very nice. That adds very nice color there. And blending it with the 190. So I can use the tip of that and kind of blend the red violet into the previously added pink, and it blends it very well. And add a little more white in that area. I'm finishing the petal on the left with the white 100 and adding a little bit of 190 coral pink on that edge. After adding a little 38 Conte pencil to the outside or the inside edge of that petal, I'm going to base coat the next petal with Rembrandt Carmine 318.9. I'm using my blender to blend that in. I'm going to brighten up the edge of that petal, the outside edge, with my Permanent Rose 397.1. And I'm going to blend that with my finger. Makes it just a little bit brighter. I'll even out that edge with my Carbocello 100 white pencil. For the shadow area up next to the previously painted petals, we're going to use the Conte 38 Matter pencil to add a shadow. And a little bit of Derwent 190 pastel to blend the two areas together. That's nice. I used my applicator to blend it softly, and then I used a little bit of white on the edge. Now we need a little more red color. So I'm using the 305 Carbothello to add that color. Now 305 Carbothello is vermilion red. It has a little more orange in it than the 310. Just lightly adding it over. Now you can increase the vibrancy and color of your rose by adding more of these particular colors than I have used. You can change the color of it. It's your painting, so you can decide to do that. If you want it to be a little redder, use more red pencils and colors to do that. Now for our shadow area, we're going to use the Carbothello 330. It is the only pastel pencil that I have found that's this color. Now we're using the Conte pencil number 39, which is garnet red. This is a lovely color. It's darker. It has a little more pigment. I'm going to modify that and blend it in by using the 305 vermilion red. I'm going to add a little bit of that red in some of these other areas as well. Now I'm using Carbothello 310, which is carmine red, to do these actual shadow areas underneath the petal that we just finished. This adds a lot of vibrancy to our rose. After putting down the red, now I'm adding the Derwent P190 coral color. These are really small areas, so I'm using pencils to get in here and add this color. Here I'm using the Carbothello 100 white to add this little area that kind of tucks itself under the petal, and using the coral, Derwent P130, to blend that in. I'm going to use it on the edge of this little petal that's hidden down in here. And then use my white Carbothello 100 to brighten up the outside edge. Using the Derwent P190 to lay down color right next to the red that we put in previously. And to blend those areas together, I'm going to use the Conte number 11 pink. It's a little bit cooler and it's a little bit darker than the Derwent, but it blends these colors together very nicely. And I'm going to use the 100 Carbothello white to add the lighter color on that petal. Use the Matter Pink number 38 to add color on that little edge of petal that's on the left. And we're going to use it to outline this next inside petal. So we're going to outline it with the Matter 38. That's the Derwent 190, the coral. And we're going to add a little, we're going to color this petal white. Add some coral over the top. And finish coloring in that area with the coral. And add the Carbothello 100 white over the coral. That helps fill in the tooth, and it just really looks nice. So I'm outlining this next little area with my 100 white as we get ready to fill in the inside of the flower. And when you see something you want to fix, go ahead and touch it up before you move on to the next step. Using the Carbothello 310, I'm adding this red color on the inside edge of this petal, and then moving outward, I'm going to use the Derwent 190 coral. I'm coming in with some Matter Pink Conte number 38 to finish blending these colors together. And for shadows, we're going to use the Carbothello 330 right on that little edge. I'm using a Derwent 190, the coral, to color in this next petal at the bottom. And adding some Carbothello 100 white on the edge. Join me for part 2 of the pink rose.